Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes, and today I'm joined by Daniel Krivelevich. Daniel, thanks for being here.
Yeah, great to be here.
Absolutely. So for folks that don't know you, your work, and what you're up to, do you mind giving a bit about your background for the audience?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the CTO and one of the founders at Cider Security, cybersecurity startup based out of Tel Aviv, Israel. We've been around for about a year and a half, and we were in the application security domain, kind of helping organizations adopt their AppSec program to the challenges of modern engineering environments, with a heavy focus on CICD, the systems, the processes that are involved within CICD as part of the attack surface of the organization. Super relevant with the rise, of course, of supply chain attacks and the heavier and heavier emphasis that attackers have on running malicious code on CI systems in CI environments. So that's kind of the territory where Cider Security operates, and I'm the CTO of Cider.
Awesome. Yeah, you guys came to my attention for that very reason. Like, I was looking into CICD security best practices and things like that, and came across your organization. And you guys are putting out a lot of great content in terms of like blogs and posts and articles and things like that, and obviously open source projects, I should say, that we'll talk on here in a moment too. But for folks that aren't familiar with like CI/CD, pipelines, and why they're so relevant in terms of software delivery in the modern ecosystem, you want to touch on that and give a bit of an overview of what exactly a CI/CD pipeline is?
Yeah, sure. So I think generally the engineering ecosystem or the engineering domain has undergone kind of a paradigm shift ever since DevOps became a thing, ever since DevOps became a commodity. Basically, the essence of CI/CD systems and pipelines is to be the intermediate stage between the source control system and then whatever happens as far as deployment to production. The responsibility is to take code, package it, test it, build it, and then deploy it downwards in the pipeline, usually to container registries, artifact repositories, or directly to production. The CI piece usually refers to the build, test, integration part of it, whereas CD is continuous delivery, or deployment refers to the solutions that, or the pipelines, the scripts that are ultimately responsible for taking those artifacts, their packages, the containers, and then sending them downwards in the pipeline to production, usually. And that paradigm shift that I was referring to refers to the shift between a lot of manual processes having to do with how code and artifacts get to production being replaced with automations. These automations are essentially the CI and CD pipelines, which basically create a reality where there is minimal or no human involvement in the process of code getting all the way from source control to production. This is what happens with the majority of modern engineering flows and environments. This is actually what happens, at Cider Security, the application that we're building. So when a developer pushes code to the code repository, the series of automation runs, and then in a matter of minutes, the code gets deployed to production after it has undergone all the relevant tests, checks, and so on and so forth, and then it gets to production. So obviously, CI/CD has been great for engineering. It allows engineering to do to deploy applications to production in a much more agile way, in a much faster way. But obviously, all these automations and the taking humans out of the equation in favor of automations also creates a lot of opportunities for attackers and potential pitfalls in building and defining those automations. And this is a big part of what we're referring to and what we're focusing on when we're talking about CI/CD security.
Yeah, definitely. I think everything you just said is a real good summary of like what a pipeline is and why it's valuable in the modern ecosystem. I feel like earlier on in the kind of the trajectory of how we've gotten here, we focused on like things going through the pipeline, securing code and artifacts coming out of the pipeline. Do you think as an industry, like, as we matured in DevOps and DevSecOps, that, many organizations maybe overlook the pipeline itself as an attack vector? And, now we're starting to kind of realize that maybe the pipeline itself, not just what's coming through the pipeline, needs to be secured as well.
Yeah. So I like to refer to the engineering ecosystem and CI/CD specifically, as the security perspective or the security oversight over these systems and processes was traditionally very, very minimal. I was 6 or 7 years ago. I was leading application security at LivePerson, a big SaaS company. And then the majority of my day to day was spent on making sure that there aren't any security flaws or security misconfigurations in production, making sure that we're not shipping bad stuff to production. But then there was already CI/CD. It was just it wasn't a part of what security was thinking of or governing or concerned with, even though these back then were already the systems that had the credentials and the red carpet all the way to production. And really, I think CI/CD, again, from the security perspective, was this small little puppy that was adopted in the organization 6, 7, 8 years ago, with security not understanding or thinking that this is something that they should be concerned about. And that was the reality all the way till, I would say, SolarWinds and all the big supply chain attacks that had happened after SolarWinds, Codecov, dependency confusion, many other examples of organizations that were hacked and had malicious code running inside their CI/CD environments and systems, which led organizations to realize that little puppy that they've been made aware of 6, 7, 8 years ago is now this giant monster that has so many potential avenues and paths for attackers to abuse it. And yeah, it's definitely been ungoverned or overlooked, not considered to be a big part of an organization's attack surface or something that security teams should be concerned about, because attackers weren't focusing on it too much throughout the years, or at least not in a way that was made public. And now it is. And now it is, and there's a big acceleration in terms of the focus of the industry towards that domain of looking at CI/CD as part of the attack surface of the organization and adapting the AppSec program to that reality. And you can see that being built through different perspectives. You can see that a lot more talks in places like RSA or DEF CON or Black Hat are focused on that. And you can see a lot more VCs investing in companies that are helping organizations address these challenges. You can see a lot of attackers trying to find ways to hack CI or CD. You can see the structure of security teams shifting a bit towards that direction, with the position of DevSecOps or SecDevOps inside security or DevOps teams, depending on the organization, becoming kind of a commodity after a certain level of maturity. So the entire industry is gradually shifting more and more focus and more attention to this unsolved problem of securing CI/CD.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you, you actually touched on my next question, was like, how do you think incidents like SolarWinds and Codecov and others have kind of led into the attention around software supply chain and obviously the pipelines as an attack vector? I know domestic, I'm in the United States, you're not, but here, in the United States, the Cybersecurity Executive Order, kind of was a spinoff of the SolarWinds incident. And we've seen a slew of, best practices and guidance come out of that we'll touch on here in a moment. But it seems like, for us, the SolarWinds incident and some of the others you talked about really brought attention to this issue. And I feel like it also brought attackers' attention to the issue. Like, wow, this is a really, rich attack vector that maybe we need to exploit more as well.
Yeah. So I think, today, the reality is that a lot of organizations are aware of this. And it's something that is high on the priority of both defenders and attackers. I think, for us, myself, I spent the 4 years prior to Cider with a company called Signia doing incident response, and basically my entire career in various enterprise security or application security positions, and my co-founder Guy, he was the CISO at AppsFlyer, a big Israeli unicorn, and we both felt that this space or that relationship, the gaps that exist between security and engineering, are gaps that are going to be continue to grow and continue to be abused by attackers as long as there isn't a good technology and a good knowledge in the industry about how to be prepared and how to adapt to this new reality, the modern engineering environment. And I think for us, when we kicked things off at Cider was late 2020, we realized that this is something that a year or two from now is going to be top of mind for security professionals in the world. And it was okay that it wasn't top of mind yet, because this is our role as entrepreneurs, as innovators. You have to think, or you have to live in 2 years from the calendar in order to predict where the industry is going and build the right solutions and technologies. But then a week into Cider, SolarWinds had happened. And SolarWinds had their CI, their Team City system hacked, and then used to spread malware to, I think it was 18,000 organizations. So obviously a lot of the discussions were focused on, CISOs asking themselves how they can prevent their organization from becoming a victim of the next supply chain attack. But obviously, there was an equally important set of questions on how to prevent the organization from becoming the next SolarWinds, and how to prevent the CI system, the CI environment, the engineering ecosystem from being hacked. And then I think it was 2 months after SolarWinds Codecov had happened, and then 2 months after that, it was dependency confusion. And time again and again, CISOs and even CEOs were starting to ask themselves, how secure is their engineering environment? How good the level of governance over the security has over the engineering ecosystem? And it was because the peers of those CISOs or CEOs were getting hacked. And so now it's top of mind for everybody. And it is top of mind for everybody a lot sooner than we had anticipated. Obviously for Cider is great. I think for the industry is great. The industry matured earlier than we had predicted it would mature. There are probably some organizations that, those hacks weren't too great for them. But I think overall for the industry, it's good that all these events had happened, because they were eye-opening, and it not only brought security practitioners or defenders to put this top of mind for them, but also there are various standards and regulations around this, like some of the ones that you mentioned earlier, which also accelerate and are helpful in making this top of mind for everyone, and making this something that is not nice to have, but a must have.
Yeah, definitely. Some amazing foresight by you all at Cider, and I think the incidents we talked about act as a forcing function, to some extent within the industry to expedite our pipeline maturity and security maturity around pipelines. So we touched on, like you talked about, gaps within the industry and emerging, guidance and best practices. I know that like NIST SSDF, there's the NIST 800-161, which is like supply chain risk management. We have the open source SSF Foundation, publishing the open source security, mobilization plan. CNCF has published, secure software factory reference architecture, software supply chain best practices. So there's tons of guidance coming out. What role do you think that guidance will play in helping the industry mature and move along? And also, any thoughts around those pieces of guidance, or any gaps, or do you think they're, contributing to moving us forward in a good way?
Yeah. So I think generally speaking, CICD security, or that part of, the security domain that focuses on the engineering ecosystem, has matured a lot, and it's going through the natural trajectory that we were at as an industry, probably I would say 10 or 15 years ago, with relation to Active Directory security or cloud security. At the beginning, it was as chaotic and as easy to hack for attackers of all levels of sophistication. And then Defenders realized this a bit later than attackers had realized this, and started closing the gap. And now the average organization has good, strong Active Directory security, cloud security. They've become a commodity. You don't have to have, it's not a luxury that only the giant organizations with big security teams can afford. And also the security industry, thanks to a lot of regulations and standards, and thanks to not only the vendors, but also the organizations that are responsible for creating those standards and frameworks. They brought to the industry not only the technologies and the solutions, but also the knowledge. And they were able to spark the right discussions in the right places to help the industry mature. And this is exactly what's happening right now. This is, I think, the natural trajectory. And part of that natural trajectory is for a lot of eye-opening attacks to happen, for the industry to realize that things need to be done differently, and then for vendors and innovators and startups, but also for all those bodies and entities that are responsible for creating those frameworks to spark the right discussions in the right places and steer the attention of everyone to making sure that we as an industry mature. And I'm happy to say that Cider also plays a part in that. We're probably going to talk about that later on in this show. But the Top 10 CICD Security Risk Initiative is something that we did to help spark those discussions about how defenders should think or adopt the attacker's perspective to then be able to ramp up their security capabilities around CICD and make sure that they're minimizing the weight of CICD systems and processes within an organization's attack surface. So just to sum it all up, going back to your question, I think all these standards are really good for the industry, and I'm hopeful that there will be more, and that more discussions will be sparked. But definitely the direction is great from my point of view.
Yeah, I think we're definitely moving in a good direction. We have a lot of great guidance and resources coming out. And I'm actually going to jump ahead to the top 10 risk real quick here because you brought it up. I've actually been using that top 10 CICD risk, resource in some of the talks I've given around software supply chain security. So, how did that initiative come about, and how have you all used it to kind of provide the folks as, a source of guidance or, best practices, that kind of thing?
Sure. So, the top 10 was the co-authors of the top 10 were Omer Gil, who was the head of research at Cider, and myself. And we know each other way back. We started our careers together as penetration testers. And the first thing that we learned as penetration testers for web applications was the OWASP top 10. And this is kind of like the Bible for web application pen testers, and you kind of memorize it in the beginning. You learn all the attack vectors, and the OWASP top 10 was an artifact that was so helpful for defenders and for the industry on creating a common language and a common set of terms on what web application security means, and what are the types of risks that defenders need to think about. And out of the OWASP top 10, there were so many other sub frameworks and solutions and discussions, and to this day, the terms and the framework that was built out of the OWASP top 10 is something that pretty much everybody doing application security or web application security in the world knows and uses on a day-to-day basis. And we drew a lot of inspiration from that great initiative that was led by OWASP, and we realized that the same thing that OWASP did for web application security back when the top 10 was released is something that would be tremendous to help the industry get to where it needs to get as far as CI/CD security. And Cider, we're called Cider not only because it's a catchy 5-letter word, it's also because we do CI/CD security. And we knew that if we want to make an impact on the world as far as how CI/CD security is done, then it's going to take not only a great technology, but also helping the industry form, the building blocks that'll help the industry think and spark those discussions, like I mentioned earlier. And that was the motivation behind the top 10. So what we did with the top 10 was it took us I think 9 or 10 months where we sat down and read a lot of material about the anatomy of different hacks and incidents that involved CICD that had happened over the past 2-3 years. Many dozens of materials combined with a lot of discussions that we've had with various experts in the industry. We collaborated with 15 experts, which contributed to this effort, from Netflix, from Atlassian, from Rapid7, from a lot of different companies. It was important for us to get a very, very wide perspective that was not only reliant on the anatomy of hacks and incidents that we read about, but also on the personal experience of people coming from different verticals and organizations of varying levels of maturity, to make sure that top 10 is as relevant as possible to as many people as possible. We fused that with a lot of environments that we ourselves had analyzed prior to Cider and mainly during our tenure at Cider, where we spend the majority of our day-to-day analyzing CI/CD environments of real organizations. And then we put all that together into a list of the top 10 CI/CD security risks, where we kind of give, of course, a description. And yeah, I saw you posted the link. So obviously the actual 40-page document and the framework is available on that website. But what we have is a description of what led us and what led the industry to be in a place where the top 10 is a must. And then the actual risks with detail about the nature and description of each risk, the impact, the steps to prevent the risk, and also all of the references, all of the reference documentation that we used to build that risk. And yeah, it turned out to be, as I said, 40-page document, so it's a pretty long read. Don't recommend reading it all in one shot. But it has been really helpful so far in doing, like I said, sparking the right discussions across the entire globe. I had people from I don't know, from Pakistan or from pretty much every location in the world, talking to us about CI/CD security and about that framework and about the way it has been helpful to their organization, to spark those discussions, to bridge the gap between security and engineering, to help security understand the engineering ecosystem a lot better. And it's also, it's also given me the opportunity to speak with experts like yourself and like many others to share thoughts and ideas. And again, all with the intention of bringing this topic to be top of mind to more and more people, to more and more experts, so we can accelerate the growth and the maturity of the industry around this topic of CI/CD security.
Yeah, on that note, I think it's definitely been highly effective in doing that. I've read it myself, shared it with many other practitioners, and I know folks use it as a resource when they're talking about securing their pipelines. So I pasted that comment, to the page in the comments there for folks that are watching. Definitely check it out. Go give it a read if you haven't already. So I wanted to ask you as well. We talked about software supply chain security. Why is the pipeline itself such a nefarious attack vector in the context of software supply chain security?
Yeah, so I think, like we said, for a very long time, it's been kind of like an ungoverned territory as far as security, and bridging the gap between security and engineering is not only important from the security angle, from security understanding the engineering domain better, but also because the angle of the engineers, and the usage of third parties has grown so much, and it's become so easy to implement third parties, whether it's a third party service, a GitHub app, or an OAuth application, or a service granted a personal access token to connect into the source control, to the CI, or a Jenkins plugin, or a GitHub action, or a Circle CI orb, the amount of flavors or ways to implement third parties has grown. The amount of time it takes to grant a third party with access to resources within CI/CD, it's minutes, it's clicks, and again, it's ungoverned. The effort from the engineer's perspective to embed a new third party is minutes. It doesn't go through security. And so it's created a very, very big attack surface. When we talk about the CI/CD attack surface, we think of the organic assets of the organization and any third party that has connectivity into those organic assets. And that's where the supply chain comes in. And like I said, the average organization we work with has many, many dozens or hundreds of third parties connecting into the environment in various ways, or having their code embedded in the environment in various ways. And then each and every one of those third parties, if the third party is hacked, then they obviously have access to all the resources and all the systems that third party can access. And because it's been ungoverned for so long, and because typically they're granted with more permissions than they actually need, and because role-based access control is not something that is ubiquitous as far as how third parties are granted access to these systems, it's created a very, very big attack surface. It's exactly what happened with Codecov, for example. Codecov is one example of a third party that organizations run in their CI. It's just one line of code inside CI that is meant to run as part of the build process, collect metrics about test coverage, and then send them to the Codecov cloud. And it was, one of dozens or hundreds of third parties that are imported in various ways in the CI. And then what happened was Codecov got hacked. The attackers changed the Codecov script to access the environment variables of the CI environment that was running Codecov, and then send all the environment variables to the attacker. Now, in any environment where the credentials that are stored as environment variables were overly permissive, and where every single pipeline could access all the environment variables, which was the case in many organizations, then the attackers ended up having administrative credentials over production environments. This is why the impact of the Codecov incident was so severe. But then Codecov is one third party, again, out of many, many dozens, which are inserted very easily into the environment, don't undergo always due diligence or any type of review process as far as the likelihood of them getting hacked, and also not too diligent typically about what type of permissions that third party is granted once it's embedded in the environment. And so every single organization after Codecov realized that nothing special about Codecov led to this incident having such a big impact. It could have happened with any other third party, and there are dozens and dozens and hundreds in the average organization. So dependency confusion was an even better example, because in dependency confusion, organizations simply had to upload a package to a public repository, and then without needing to have access permissions to the source control, to the CI of the organization, they were able to run malicious code in the CI, just because the CI or the client fetching the package was not configured properly, configured to always fetch the latest version of a package, regardless of the location where that package is hosted. And so, it affected Microsoft, Apple, it affected a lot of giant organizations, small, medium, it was many, many thousands of organizations that were affected by it. And all it took was one upload of a malicious package to a public repository. That's it. And so I think, this is what brought organizations to the realization that they have to start thinking about CI/CD as an attack surface. They have to start understanding how far an attacker would go if they were able to run malicious code inside a pipeline or gain a developer's permission to the source control of the CI, and then start minimizing the attack surface and start aligning that environment better to the principle of least privilege, implementing role-based access control, basically implementing the same security principles and thought patterns that exist in every single other place in the organization to that engineering ecosystem that's been ungoverned for many, many years.
Yeah, you talked about a lot of great points there. One being like organizations themselves as a supply chain risk management, threat vector or attack vector for malicious actors. And you also talked about like code and packages, for example, software components being an attack vector as well. Kind of sticking with the software supply chain aspect of things, what are your thoughts about how we're headed in the direction of SBOM as an industry, starting to get more visibility around the software we're consuming, the vulnerabilities associated with it and whatnot? Any thoughts on that front?
Yeah, so SBOM, from my perspective, became something that was top of mind for everyone after Log4j. Because in Log4j, again, it's not just the CISOs, but it was also CEOs who were asking themselves, how can such a small package, which is one out of thousands or millions that we have in the organization, how can it be that the reality is that a flaw or vulnerability in one package can disrupt the organization so badly and basically shut down entire engineering and security groups for a week? Like, that was my experience. All of the organizations that we work with, they spent about a week doing nothing but Log4j. And it's just one package, right? And so after Log4j, the majority of experts that I had spoken with had this kind of like eureka moment where they realized we need to gain better control over the dependencies that we're using in the code. Again, it's been ungoverned for too long. Developers are able to implement any dependency that they want. And so the code is full of dependencies, which on the one hand is great, but on the other hand, you need to have the appropriate security guardrails to allow developers to operate freely. And part of those guardrails, or part of the controls that defenders need, is having very, very good visibility and oversight over the dependencies that are being used. And it's not only the direct dependencies that are being imported by developers, but any transitive dependency that is kind of in Cider, we call it DoD, dependencies of dependencies. But direct and transitive dependencies are something that organizations understood that they need to have very, very good visibility over after Log4j. And then that understanding grew even more. I think it was 2-3 months after Log4j with Spring4Shell, which basically led organizations to the realization that this is going to happen a lot. Log4j, Spring4Shell, they're just two examples, but since I spent so much of my time focusing on that, I have pretty much probably a dozen more where a very well-known, widely used package became known vulnerable or known compromised. And then organizations need, at the moment that it's been made aware that there's a package that's known vulnerable, known compromised, they need to understand exactly if they're using it, and then if they're using it, where it's being used, and if it's something that they need to fix directly because it's a dependency that they're using directly, or it's something that some third party introduces, and then they need to understand exactly what third party introduces that package to their environment, and then what type of fixes they can apply to mitigate or remove the risk. And this is essentially SBOM. SBOM is both a concept, but also I think it's like a set of technical specifications that basically put organizations in the understanding that they need to have a full understanding at any given point in time of all the dependencies that are used directly or indirectly inside their code. And then that needs to be, that level of granularity and knowledge needs to be consistent across all the different development languages and frameworks that are being used. And that's a bit challenging. And I think that's the next leap that organizations are going to have to make with relation to their understanding of SBOM. Now that everyone knows that they need SBOM, the challenge is understanding whether or not they have coverage over all of the different languages and frameworks and all of the different package managers and the intricacies of each package manager with relation to how it imports packages. And then also make sure that they're covering both direct and indirect dependencies. So SBOM is again, we've made some good steps in the direction of where we need to be, but I think from my experience, the majority of organizations are still looking for the solutions that'll help them be consistent with their SBOM coverage across their entire engineering ecosystem and across the full dependency tree, and not just the direct dependencies.
Yeah, definitely a ton of great points there. I think, we've seen some progress around SBOM adoption and evangelizing it, but organizations are still got have a long way to go in terms of maturing and operationalizing it as part of their cybersecurity program, more broadly, and make sure they're covering every source of software they're consuming or producing, as you said, and all the dependencies that they're pulling in or that are included in software they're consuming. Even as a SaaS provider, for example, I'm consuming a SaaS. They have dependencies and components that they're using that could be vulnerable as well. So a lot of great points there. You talked about Log4j. I just want to give a quick plug in the United States here. Department of Homeland Security actually just published the Cyber Safety Review Board published like their Log4j kind of summary of incident and way forward recommendations, that kind of thing, just got published today. So definitely give that a look and check it out for folks that haven't. And I also wanted to ask, before we let you go real quick here, any recommendations? We talked a lot about, OpenSSF, CNCF, CSA, your guys' top 10 risk, obviously, for pipelines. For folks wanting to learn more about best practices around, pipeline, CICD security, any recommendations or, where can they find Cider and, resources you guys are putting out, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so obviously Cider has some interesting initiatives. The top 10 being the theory of the attacker's perspective with the different risks, and I think for anyone that's looking to get a better understanding of why these seemingly naive systems and processes that make up for CICD aren't so naive, how they can be abused, learn the theory, understand the attacker's perspective. Top 10 is a great resource. One other resource that's also part of what Cider's been doing is the CICD GOAT. The CICD GOAT is another type of GOAT project together with Cloud Goat, TerraGoat. So, for anyone who doesn't know, GOAT is kind of a term that's used to describe a project that's deliberately vulnerable. And there are a lot of very cool, useful GOATs out there, each one covering a specific technical topic. CICD GOAT is one of them. It's a deliberately vulnerable environment where people can actually download a local environment containing a source control CI, production, local stack environment on their laptop, and then enact the top 10 risks, and then understand, hands-on how attackers behave, and also understand hands-on how the measures that solve these risks or that remove these risks, how they can be implemented. In addition to that, there has been recently a project that was released by CIS, kind of a CIS benchmark for supply chain. I think it was released about a week ago, so relatively new. And yeah, I expect there to be many more of those. I think it really depends on the perspective that you lack. At the end of the day, yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, we need to have, in order to do CICD security right, we need to have a fusion of three perspectives. We need to understand the engineer's perspective, the attacker's perspective, and the defender's perspective. And it's challenging. It's challenging because each one of both the attacker's perspective and the engineer's perspective has evolved tremendously over recent years, and there's a lot of knowledge and know-how a lot of gaps to bridge, and so I think For security, it's really about understanding, creating an ability to have a shared common language or vocabulary with engineers to understand their ecosystem well enough to then be able to derive the risk. This is the challenge that I believe many defenders that we speak with are facing. But then for engineers, for DevOps practitioners, they also, again, need to bridge the gap from their side and understand the security perspective, understand how security practitioners and attackers think. So I would say everyone, each individual needs to understand what out of the three perspectives they lack, and then read and try to enact and hands-on the things that'll help them bridge the gap and assume that perspective. So
yeah, I think you kind of emphasize, where we're headed in regards to, like, as an industry pushing for DevSecOps and communicating between the groups, because as you pointed out, if developers don't understand the security, considerations of the pipeline, it's hard to secure it. And then if security folks don't understand how engineering and development teams are, producing and delivering software in the modern, like, cloud native ecosystem, it's really hard to help integrate security into that as well. So communicate. That said, I have a question we ask every guest. Last question we ask is, like, what does the term cyber resiliency mean to you, or cyber resilience?
So I think cyber resilience is something that that is very much driven, again, by the attacker's perspective. I think for me, especially after spending 4 years doing incident response, as you grow, or the part of the growth of the security practitioner is learning a lot of theory, a lot of standards, a lot of best practices. Like, this is where the security journey for most defenders begins. But then the cyber battlefield doesn't always look like the theory and the best practices that you learn. And what happens in a real incident, as far as what attackers are doing, what controls and measures are effective against attackers, preventing what attackers are doing, detecting what they're doing, how to respond well in an incident, how to prevent an incident. What does it feel like from the defender's perspective to be inside an incident? This is a mandatory, I think, knowledge and perspective that defenders need to have, and that everyone who wants to be resilient needs to have in order to actually be resilient. Because I think for me, being resilient is being prepared not in relation to theory and best practices, but mainly in relation to what is actually going on in the cyber battlefield. So I think for me, cyber resilience means understanding the attacker's perspective well enough to build a cybersecurity program that is driven not only by best practices, but also by realistic threats, realistic attack scenarios, and preparing as well as you can to an actual incident with actual activities, red teaming, purple teaming, a lot of different types of activities, but all of them are based on the logic and the idea that theory and best practices are not enough.
Yeah, I love that perspective. Obviously, there's tons of guidance and best practices to leverage, but tying that to actual, like, TTPs and threat intelligence of, what people are actually doing in the wild is going to be far more effective. So that said, definitely thank you so much for joining us, Daniel. For folks that haven't checked out Cider, you can look at cidersecurity.io. That's where you can find the top 10 risks, the Cider Go information. They have an incredible blog that has a lot of great articles on there as well. And really excited to have you on and keep pioneering in this space.
Thank you so much. It was really great to be hosted.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Bye-bye.